It starts with an itch and a tingle, and then it builds and expands. And suddenly, all at once, my legs won't let me stand. I scratch till my fingers go numb.
Hi everybody, and welcome to this episode of Suicide Sucks. So with me in the van today, I have got Chris, and we've both got a nice hot drink. I'm sure you'll be pleased to know. Chris, what have you got?
I've got a coffee.
You've got a coffee, no sugar.
No,
sweet
best way.
enough. And I've got tea, obviously, because I don't like coffee, which is very infuriating. So yeah, we've got Chris in the camper today, and it's a bit chilly. We've got the blankets ready just in case, but actually Chris is here in his shorts, and apparently he's hot if it's 15 degrees. So I think we're going to be all right today.
I think we'll manage.
Now, Chris has had experience of both physical and sexual abuse in his childhood. He's served in the military, and he's overcome a life of addiction, deprivation, poverty, psychosis, homelessness, and ultimately incarceration. He's going to tell us his story. We're going to have a little chat. He's also going to let us know about his work he does now. He's a frontline services worker for a local homeless charity. And most importantly, he's a lecturer, a poet, a podcaster, and a dad.
Absolutely, the most important one, a dad.
Of course. So, Chris, as you know, the first question is always, tell us about your darkest day.
Sure. So, this is probably something I don't know if you've heard about this before, but my darkest day was the day I almost killed 6 people. I was sent to prison for this, and I ultimately served quite a long time. So I suppose I'd better expand on what I've just said.
Yeah, for anyone who can't see me, obviously
Yeah,
my jaw
the
is
look
on the
of shock.
ground.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I don't know if anybody has ever seen The Truman Show.
Yes.
If any of the listeners have ever seen The Truman Show, you'll know what I'm about to describe. At the time of this offence, I was suffering from psychosis. I was seeing and hearing things that weren't real. I had delusions, I was paranoid. It was drug-induced. I'd been awake for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. I'd been cuckooed in my home. And it led to me having to seek accommodations. I'd just done 30 days in prison, and this was obviously not enough for me to have learned my lesson. And the day I was released, I went straight back to these same people who had taken over my home and purchased some poisons, which I promptly injected in my veins. I found myself back at at my bail hostel, which was one of the prerequisites of my release. And I just felt this deep longing, this deep sadness. I missed my mum, and I wanted to go home. And just like the previous 2 years, I thought that going out and stealing some scrap metal was the best way to get some money to go home. So I used my last £2, and I purchased a hacksaw and I think a Stanley knife or something from a box cutter from Poundland. And I went back to my property. And conveniently enough, there was a candle located in the cellar. Psychosis is pervasive. It's insidious. If my mum, who I probably trust more than anyone in the world, had phoned me up to say, "You're really ill, Chris," I would have said, "Well, then you're obviously part of it, Mum." Everything was about me. It's an incredibly narcissistic existence. Every tattoo, every logo on someone's sweatshirt was about me. The advertisements on buses, everything on the radio, everything on the TV was all directed against me. And I thought that I was being followed by cameras, like The Truman Show, and that I had to put on a show, I'm doing air quotes, a show for the viewers. And it almost had to be how reckless I could be and how crazy, and yeah. Now that I talk about it and think about it, I know I was very unwell, but at the time it was very real to me. So I decided to steal scrap metal from the bail hostel I was living in. Now the problem with that was it was already connected up to something. So I went to the cellar And I was just walking around the cellar. I mean, I'd been awake for a day. I'd been released from prison. I hadn't slept. I'd injected amphetamines. And there was benefits letters strewn across the ground. And in my delusional state, benefits equals money. Obviously, this is the clue I'm supposed to follow. I'm supposed to be here. And then I took another step around the corner and I seen what looked like a film set. There was a massive fuse box, all lit up by lighting. The lighting was pointing directly at it. And in my ill, delusional state, I thought, obviously I'm supposed to be here. This is supposed to happen. And I seen copper piping, as thick as my arm, stretched all the way across the cellar. And using the convenient candle I just mentioned as a light source, I lit this candle and I held it aloft. And I approached the largest pipe, massive copper pipe. And I took my hacksaw and I began to saw what I thought was a water pipe. It was gas. And as soon as the gas left, it hit the flame, and a massive 6 to 8 foot plume of blue jet flame just completely engulfed my face and head. I could smell and feel my skin burning. My hair as well. And the whole place started to go up. So I dropped everything and I ran. And I got maybe 10 meters away from the house and I thought, sugar honey iced tea, Chris, there's people in there. So I turned and I ran back and I went up to the very top, and every door I banged on until someone answered, and if they didn't answer I would kick it open and scream, fire, 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 get out. I was scared. I knew I was in trouble. So I locked myself in the bathroom to gather my thoughts, and I didn't realise just how quickly the smoke was building up. It was building up to such a degree that I was starting to choke. So I jumped into the bathtub and I tried to suck air out of the hole through the sinkhole, but it wasn't enough. Psychosis saved my life here. Excuse me. 2 weeks previously, whilst in HMP Doncaster, I was watching something on the TV, and remember a couple of minutes ago I said everything about psychosis is all about you. Every newspaper article, every single thing was about me. And I was watching a movie called The Kinsman. And in that movie, the character is, I don't know whether he's training or what it is, but he's with some other characters and they're in a room, and next thing the room starts filling with water. So the character swims over and he pulls a pipe off the wall and he sticks it down the S-bend of the toilet. The movie explains that because of gravity, there is an air pocket on the other side of the S-bend. So I could feel myself starting to pass out. Smoke inhalation was getting really bad. Black stars were appearing before my eyes, and I knew I was going to pass out pretty soon. And then click, it just came to me in a flash. Oh crap, the movie. So I reached over to a pipe on the wall. I yanked it off the wall. I shoved it down the toilet, and lo and behold, it worked. And I could breathe. And that's where the fire brigade found me 10 minutes later, and they broke the door down and pulled me out. And yeah, it's safe to say that was my darkest day. And it was almost the darkest day of many other people too.
Jesus Christ, Chris.
Sorry, you probably weren't expecting to hear that.
Yeah, that's definitely what I can imagine being a dark day.
Yeah.
So what happened after they found you?
Well, after they found me, I was on bail. I was on bail for a series of commercial burglaries. I was stealing scrap metal. I'd met a group of people and they were my quote-unquote friends. I'm autistic and I've never been able to differentiate sheep from wolves. And drugs were free from these group of people until they no longer weren't. But it turns out they had a perfect solution for me to get it back, and they would drop me off at certain locations and tell me where to go and how to get in and what to take. And I did that for quite a while and got caught for it eventually, thankfully, mercifully. I would steal maybe £500 or £600 worth of stuff, and I would go to the boss and he would give me a single shot of drugs in a needle and maybe £3 coins. That was it. I was a slave.
That was the exact word I was going to use then, yeah.
Yeah, it was modern slavery. I was a slave. They would rent me out to workmen for a week's work here and a week's work there, and They wouldn't pay me. I used to have local businessmen calling to my door, giving me a fiver and telling me to sort myself out, which meant to go and get some drugs. And they knew that that was pretty much the only wages they would have to pay me that day. I was desperate. I realise now it's pathetic it was, you know, and how sad it was that those people did that. You know, not for me for accepting it, but for those people to do that, you know. And that mercifully, I got caught and I got sent to prison for 30
how
days.
old were you?
Oh, this is pretty recent. This is 2015 when I got sent to prison. So I was in my early 30s.
Right.
And now in my early 40s. Yeah, I just moved here.
From Ireland?
From Ireland, yes,
Right,
in
okay.
2014, yeah. So mercifully I was sent to prison, and that's where I seen the movie The Kinsman. And so the result of the arson was I was sent to prison for quite a long time. I was in Marshgate prison when my paperwork first came through the door. And the original charge was arson with intent to endanger life. And it was 25 to life. Yeah. I was very ill, very, very ill, and I was a drug addict, hopelessly hooked. I needed help. But unfortunately for us, prisons are full of people that our mental health institutions can't, won't, or for somehow slip through the cracks. I think it was the statistics was 80% of all male prisoners have mental health issues. 60% are illiterate. It's crazy. And so, yeah, I got sent to prison for 3 years and 9 months. The charge was lowered. I ended up meeting with a forensic psychologist who diagnosed me with psychosis and delusions. And I was very lucky. It was lowered to reckless arson. I took part in restorative justice where I met the victims of some of my crimes, some people I'd stolen from, and the gentleman who owned that property. And out of respect for the integrity of the programme, I won't mention his name, but Mr. M, it was a life-changing experience for him to come to prison and to speak to me and see that I wasn't a monster with bared fangs. And for me, he wasn't just a case number. And I
Wow,
cried.
that's amazing. Yeah, what an experience.
It was an amazing experience. Restorative justice is very underused in this country and costs absolutely nothing to implement, you know. And
Yeah.
sometimes when you're confronted with the human face of what you've done, it can change your world. It really can. But yeah, I got sent to prison for 3 years and 9 months. I got 3 years for the arson and 9 months for a series of other lesser crimes. Yeah.
And then how was it for you when you came out? I mean...
Well, when I came out, prison was a very transformative place for me. I remember a moment, a catalyst of great change for me happened whilst in prison. And I was speaking to a wise person, you know, this sage that had just come into my life. My delusions, my psychosis and my delusions were religious based. You know, I've always been a lifelong socialist, a communist, an atheist, and I thought anyone who had any type of spiritual belief was deluded. So then to find myself suddenly confronted with what I thought was a great intelligence reading my mind, you know, and predicting the thing, and it was me. But at the time, it's so believable and so supernatural, and your world is so dark that and you're ill. But because of this, I remember looking for some meaning, some religious meaning. And I put an inquiry in with the chaplaincy to start attending Buddhist services. And Ozzy, he's a Church of England vicar, I suppose he wanted to get me batting for their team. He walked onto the wing one day and he asked to see me. And I don't know what he's seen. He saw something within me. And he said, Chris, you don't realise this could be actually quite a lucky place for you to be. Lucky? I'm in effing prison and this guy is telling me that I'm lucky. And he said, wait a second. And then he said to me something that changed everything. He said, only 2 types of prisoners spend time in a cell. One is a prisoner, the other is a monk. You can choose what you want to be. So I deserved to be where I was. But I'd also been punished. What I felt was more than my fair due from society too. So I took responsibility for my crimes. And I decided to just get on with my time. And it's changed everything for me. My time seemed to go quicker. I quit taking drugs, literally, on the spot.
Wow.
Literally on the spot. I handed back my psychiatric medication, which I wouldn't advise anyone to ever do, but I was still ill at the time. And I swapped it for a new addiction to the gym. I started working for the chaplaincy, and crucially I became a reading and writing mentor for an organisation called the Shannon Trust, Turning Pages, helping illiterate men to read and write. And I remember sharing a moment of great beauty and light inside a prison one day. I'll just set the scene a little bit. 2 prisoners in their prison greys sitting in the library, both in for serious offences. One was a foreign national, well, both were foreign nationals, but one was from Afghanistan and struggled to read. And both sitting there in our greys, and we're both crying because he's 42 years old, and for the first time in his life, he's read the first line of a children's book.
Oh.
So prison was a very transformative place for me. In fact, I work for a local homelessness charity in Sheffield called the Archer Project. I've been there since the very day I was released from prison. And it was actually prison staff who got me that job. They seen something in me. They picked me up from outside prison. They gave me £150. They bought me a week in a hotel so I wouldn't be homeless, gave me some toiletries, some food, and they cushioned my fall from when I was released.
Amazing.
And because of them, I'm speaking right now.
Wow. And sorry, what's that called?
The place I work for. The Cathedral Archer Project. It's based in Sheffield.
Archer Project, right.
Yeah, so that was a catalyst.
Yeah.
Prison definitely was a catalyst.
Yeah.
A huge one.
Wow. So do you find, I mean, when you're working at the homeless, what kind of things do you do there?
So I'm a mentor.
Right.
So I build relationships with people, and I build relationships with people who are like me. So our staff do an incredible job. We're one of the most underfunded and understaffed places. We don't get paid a lot. There are some charities that, unfortunately, charity has become a large money-making industry. And I won't go into details and make names, but I find it very distasteful. Mm-hmm. Our CEO, all of our managers' wages can be found online. It's public record, and they get paid a pittance. And I love working there. They try to make a difference. And so do our staff, but sometimes you're dealing with people like me. And people like me sometimes won't respect you unless you've been in my shoes. And our words can carry a lot more weight. A case in point, I was speaking with an individual last week, and he had told staff that he had quit. He was no longer using drugs. But to me, it was obvious that he was completely fibbing. He was completely lying. So I pulled him to one side and I said, dude, your eyes are pinned. You know it's me, right? And everyone calls me Irish, and I wonder why. And he said, all right, Irish, you're right, mate. You know, because we understand that life. But it was never in an aggressive, like in a judgmental way. Like, you know, I mean, come on, man, it's me.
Yeah.
And the person opened up a bit more. So I think it makes us more effective at our job. We've been to prison, the mentors, we've been on the streets, lots of us, we've been in situations similar to the people we support. So I think it makes us more effective at our job. And I've made something of a niche of a career for myself talking about, well, this, about some of the worst things I've ever done. You know, I didn't want to come out of prison and the people whisper, hey, guess what he's done? I wanted to stand in front of them and say, hey, guess what I did?
Yeah, that's it's all about taking ownership of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that people can't judge you, really, because you're literally judging yourself.
Judging myself.
Almost, yeah.
So I took responsibility, and I still do to this day.
That's fantastic. So really, you're saying that you were in a dark place, and what got you through was basically being in prison almost.
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, a lot of the people I have on the podcast, you know, they've all tried this counselling and that counselling and this therapy and that therapy.
Yeah.
Have you never had any of that?
I am still in therapy.
You're still in therapy?
I will be for the rest of my life. When we talk about recovery, this is something that it's a particular bugbear for me. You don't ever recover. You don't ever recover from certain things. They just get further away, longer ago, and you learn to deal with them. But being through stuff like that, being through suicide, being through psychosis, and I've attempted suicide myself, but being through things like these, situations like these, they leave an indelible mark upon your soul. They do. They always do. So for me, recovery can be quite new. It's more nuanced than what we think. I'm recovering, and I always will be. And I'm happy with that, you know, because it beats being ill.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's a work in progress. And I have PTSD. I was diagnosed a couple of years ago with autism, which makes sense that I could never really tell the sharks from the goldfish. But yeah, recently I had to do a DBS check for work. Now, work, I've always been very aware of everything I've done. I'm very honest. I mean, it's on podcasts, you know. So work, I've always been aware of. I've always been honest. But so I did my DBS check for work, and it was returned to me. And so I read it in a sort of semi-detached way. It's like, felt like a different person. And then 2 weeks ago, I was watching something on Netflix called, I don't know, The Ice Cream Wars, I think it was called, or something. And in this, there was an arson. Excuse me. Oops. Excuse me, hiccuping. And in this program, there was an arson attack. And a baby got killed, and I think another child, and there was a lot of people killed. And I was just sitting there watching it with my friend, and boom, out of nowhere, it just caught me right into the fields. It hit me right in the fields, and I was on the ground, head between my knees, sobbing in utter shame and guilt. Like, I thought I had put all of that to bed, you know, but I'm a decent person, and I feel bad for the things I've done, and feel guilt, and I feel shame. So I don't think it was an unhealthy response, but it just goes to show you that it's an ongoing process, recovering.
Absolutely. And I think it's, you know, almost every episode we mention shame and guilt, you know, it's those that eat away at you and that often are what cause the suicidal thoughts, because
I'm a burden.
it's so difficult to get out of. You know, if you can't forgive yourself of shame and guilt, you know, how can you move on? So it is a massive part of people's journey, isn't it?
Yeah, you're completely right. And it was only really through prison staff and staff at the Archer Project who, for the first time in my life, I could view myself through the eyes of other people. And for the first time ever, I liked what I saw. Which was something I'm still getting used to.
Yeah, that's given me goosebumps. It is like such a massive feeling, isn't it?
Massive. One person can make a vast difference in another person's life. One person.
Yeah.
One single human being can vastly change someone's life. It only takes a minute to stop and talk.
So true.
The people I've mentioned just there now, the people who have helped me, some of those people were only in my life for mere moments. They changed everything.
Amazing.
Yeah, it is.
Can I take you back to when you know, obviously things started to go wrong at some point.
Yeah.
Back when, you know, it all started, I suppose. Why do you think you got to that point where you ended up homeless? Why did you even start taking drugs? You know, things like that.
Sure.
Is there something?
Yeah. So I was physically and sexually abused when I was very small. And it's something that I do quite a bit of lecturing now. I chat with kids in schools and stuff. And I'm very open about this because there are a lot of men, especially, who have been sexually abused and I've just finished therapy. I've just finished my sexual abuse therapy this year. I'm 42. You know, I've had hundreds of hours of therapy for other stuff, but I never really got down to the nitty-gritty and tried to tackle this because it's difficult to talk about and to even understand the emotions that I'm feeling. But for me, I was physically and sexually abused when I was young, psychologically abused as well. My stepfather wasn't a very nice man. He was a horrible man. He would beat me for the least things. And I remember one instance when I was 13 years old. I'd stolen some stuff from the house in a vain attempt to impress some older boys in the street. And what worried me about that situation, that instance, was my stepfather was very angry, but he didn't immediately beat me. He planned it. He left, and he went to the pub and he got as drunk as he could. And I remember the fear, the cold feeling of dread. Hands feeling like ice and sweating all day, cold sweats on my back. I remember it now vividly. I was laying in my bed, it was maybe 2 a.m, and our door bust open, shattering the glass on the side panel. And I remember boom, 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 as a human being ran up the stairs on all fours like a wolf. And my door burst open, and next thing he was sailing through the air, and he jumped on top of me. Yeah, kicks and boots, and I felt myself starting to lose consciousness. I tried to put my hands up to my face to protect myself, and I could feel his nails clawing at my face just to hurt me even further, because he couldn't really get the soft spots. So he continued like that for quite a while with the beating, and he left. Just suddenly it stopped. I remember blood, and I was stinging, and I was sore, and I had my floral duvet wrapped around me, and I heard him rummaging around in the other room. We've always kept firearms at home, and we've always been smallholders. We've had turkeys, geese to protect our flock, you know. I remember pulling down the blanket because it had gone too quiet, and there was a double-barrel shotgun 3 inches in front of my face. "I'll kill you, you bastard." And then he pulled the trigger on an empty chamber.
Oh my God.
Click. Something I can remember with perfect clarity today. Something happened to me then. I was 13 years old. He left my room, but I did too. I don't know what happened. I do know what happened, but I left my body and I went very far away. And I don't have any recollection for the next 12 hours. I left my body. It took me many years of therapy as a grown man years later to realize that what happened to me was called disassociation. And disassociation is the brain's way of protecting itself from some truly unbearable knowledge. I read a book recently called The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, and that's one of their,
Yes.
I'm just paraphrasing what they said, it's the body's way of protecting itself from
I've just downloaded that on
amazing.
Audible.
It was like describing me.
Wow.
Or anyone who suffered with trauma. And it was, my body's way of protecting me from the knowledge that, oh crap, my dad's going to shoot me dead. And it was pretty soon after that I started to smoke cannabis. In fact, it was, I think, about 10 days maybe. I was in school and someone passed me a joint and I felt my soul was dead at that point. Why the hell not? And it was when I started smoking, as soon as I smoked it, I knew I'd come home. I knew I'd come home. It wrapped me up in its embrace, and everything felt good. And I felt good. And the thing about it, I often say the cliche that, drugs take the pain away. Like, nothing can take the pain away. They just make you feel good. The pain's still there, you just feel good irregardless. So it made me feel good. And I think I've still stayed as that 13-year-old boy, I don't think I'm 42 now, and I still feel somewhat stuck as that young lad, But I've managed to come to terms with him, and give him a hug and tell him that he did the best he could, I spoke about this on a BBC show I'd done before, that in order to stop the abuse at home, I had faked having asthma, which is ironic because last year I was told I had asthma. I realised that the beatings would stop and the abuse would stop when I would fake an asthma attack and go to hospital. So 12, 13, 14 years old, I spent a long time in hospital, all fake. But I had to fake having asthma. I couldn't tell the nurses or doctors the reason I was really there. And I had a lot of guilt and shame all of my life about that, until some therapy, where it was pointed out to me that that 12-year-old child did the best that they could to survive.
Exactly.
And my guilt and my shame melted
Yeah.
away. And I was able to meet that little boy and give him a hug
Yeah.
and tell him I was proud of him and to thank him for getting me this far.
Absolutely. All that guilt and shame should be on him.
It's on them,
Yeah.
yes. And it was around this time that I was sexually assaulted by an older cousin, a cousin in her 30s. There's some wonderful people in my family, but there are also some pedophiles within my family. Myself and some cousins have been sexually abused by them. We've recently just gone to the police about it, myself, and my cousin in Ireland has done the same. So yeah, school was also a particular bugbear. Autistic, and because of the stuff that was going on at home, I was odd, different. And I was picked on and bullied in school. It was also, in the 90s, it was very unusual. The head teacher, it was a Gaelic-speaking school, and the head teacher would enforce that with his fists. So school, home, nowhere was safe for young Chris. The only place that was safe was being absolutely blitzed out of my mind. And it makes perfect sense, doesn't it? It makes perfect sense. So that is what started the drugs and the alcohol trauma. Which
And
is
then it's a coping mechanism, isn't it?
Yes, it's a coping mechanism, you know. How do you regulate your emotions? Well, it's quite easy if you have a substance there that you can just regulate them at will. And yeah, that coloured most of my life.
And how did you move from cannabis to anything else? I
Sure.
mean, was it inevitable?
No, again, it's not being able to see the goldfish for the sharks. So, as I grew up, you know, I joined the military. I did 5 years military service, which I'm proud of, but probably I only did it for my stepfather, so probably not the greatest idea to take a already traumatized young man and drop him into the very adult world of the armed forces. So I left the armed forces and I bounced around for a bit, and I got into a relationship with a person, and we were together for 8 years, 9 years, and we had a couple of kids together. And yeah, it was quite an abusive relationship. I left that relationship. And I remember I was living in a house in a village about maybe 20 miles away from Dublin, from where I was living in the family home. And I met a guy. I don't want to mention his name. I met Paul. Okay. Paul just became a really close friend. He just came to my house every single day. We'd only known each other about 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 2 months, but we became best friends in that time. I was in my early 30s, a grown man. I was making a friend like I did as a kid. Excuse me. And Paul would come around every day. And I remember one time I hung up the phone with my kid's mum, and she just told me I would never see them again. And I said, hung up the phone. Paul was in the living room with me, and I said, for F's sake, do you know what? I've lost everything now. I might as well just try heroin. What I didn't expect was for Paul to stand up, put his hand into his pocket, and say, look what I've got. Paul was a heroin addict, but I didn't know it. So I felt like I'd already written the check that, my mouth had written the check that I had to go and cash. So within a few minutes I found myself upstairs booting, chasing the dragon, smoking smack, smoking gear. And it was the most disgusting thing I have ever tasted in my life. I actually smelled some at the train station this morning on my way to meet you, and it always catches me in the back of my throat and makes me want to gag. I had to rub toothpaste inside my mouth just to smoke it. It tastes so disgustingly vile. When the residue sticks to your teeth. I'm really not selling it, and I hope I'm not. So I would smoke it every day with Paul for about 6 weeks. You know, he'd come down, him and his brother, we'd smoke here, and yeah. Then one day, in the morning, because like clockwork, Paul would be at my door. And now he knew he could smoke there. Addicts are very selfish, and it's always advantageous to have another addict friend, because then you have 2 people's resources instead of 1. And of course I didn't see this at the time, you know. And then one morning Paul wasn't there. Like clockwork he was, and then one morning he wasn't. And I felt awful. My nose was running. I had diarrhea. and constipated at the same time, if you could figure that one. My bones were aching. I couldn't sleep. My legs were just kicking, tossing and turning. I just felt so sick. Paul turned up a couple of hours later, and I told him what I felt, and he said, "You're rattling," which means you're having withdrawal symptoms from the drug. I was aghast, but I mean, it didn't last for too long, because I was like, "Well, what have you got on you?" And he said, "I've got a bag, Chris, but I've only got one bag, and I've got a pin, which is a needle, a rig." Our tolerances had become quite high at the time, and smoking a bag between the two of us would just about make us feel okay. We wouldn't actually get any effect from the drug. So Paul had this old needle, and he injected himself, and he was under the influence. He was kind of like gouching, I don't know how to describe it. He was kind of nodding his head and stuff a bit. And I said to him, "So are you going to get me, or are you going to hit me?" Because I'd never injected myself before. And I briefly floated the idea of blood-borne viruses. Paul said, "Chris, your best friend, man, I'm not going to hurt you." So he went inside and he gave the needle a cursory wash with some cold water. And then he injected me. So Paul didn't tell me he was a heroin addict, but what he also didn't tell me was that he had hepatitis C. And the first time I ever used a needle, I shared. And the first time I ever used a needle, I contracted hepatitis C. Oh, no. Yeah. Yeah. So it wasn't long after that we got into some debt with some very serious people, and I had to flee. And so I fled to sunny, exotic Rotherham.
Two words that maybe haven't normally been associated with Rotherham.
No, I had a friend from Dublin who was working here, and he was working in Sheffield and living in Rotherham.
Right.
So I found myself there.
And that was in
2014.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. And did you continue with drugs then?
The thing about addiction, addicts have superpowers. I don't speak Russian, right? I don't speak Portuguese. If you were to drop me into Rio in the morning, and you drop me into Moscow in the morning, I'll find drugs in seconds. Addicts have this innate ability to be able to seek out their poison. You can just sense, people who are neurodivergent can sense when other people, and most of my friends are like me, we're all a bit bloody weird, you know. Most of my guy and girl friends are all a bit strange, because like attracts like, you know. And I would always find drugs. And I think it took me like an hour, 2 hours after landing in Rotherham before I managed to find and score some drugs. And that's when I got involved with those people, the gang. I got involved with the gang who purported to be my friend, but the ones I said previously that the drugs were free until they no longer weren't. Yeah. Then those people had taken over ownership of me as a carer. They were getting paid carer's allowance for me. They were supposed to be giving me an injection for my hepatitis C. They wouldn't do it. They'd swap it with water. They'd keep me ill because I was a cash cow. And I trusted them with my life, because I trust people far too easy. As the previous story has just proven, you know, I trust people far too easy. And then, yeah, I ended up strung out on their drugs and serving drugs for them and doing jobs for them all for free and being rented out to people. And so,
Which brings us back full circle, doesn't it?
Yep.
So for you, obviously, the going to prison was your kind of saviour, really, in a way. Obviously, let's not recommend to people that that's the way to. It
worked for me, but it's
so what would you say?
The staff are rude, the accommodations are crap. I've had better holidays, 1 out of 5 on TripAdvisor. Please don't go, folks.
So what would you say to somebody listening who might be, you know, potentially in your shoes, you know, suffering with PTSD from previous traumas, maybe have got themselves involved in drugs? What's the answer if you're not going to go to prison? What would you say? What would you have said? What would you have done, do do you think,
Yeah.
I mean, it could have been a completely different outcome, of course, but
Yeah.
with hindsight and looking back, if prison hadn't have been the option that got you through, what do you think could have helped you?
Rehab, but I wasn't going to go. Like I said, I was down an alleyway in like with nothing. I once I had drugs, I was happy. There was, unless somebody interdicted on my behalf and took all of my fate from me and took all of my decision-making processes from me, took me and forcibly, like they do in Portugal. What I respect about Portugal and their drug. So most drugs are decriminalised in Portugal. And somebody can feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I do a lot of working for criminal justice podcasting and stuff, and so I'm pretty sure of it that if drugs are part of your index offences, they force you to go to rehab for up to 18 months. Instead of going to prison, you're sent to a rehab. Now, I would have been better served going to a hospital or a rehab facility, but prison worked for me because I made it work. I think my previous military experience kind of made it a bit easier for me to accept. You know, get help. But I hate when people say that, because what does that look like? You know?
Yeah, it's hard, isn't it? Because once you're in it, it's like you're down a deep black hole with no ladder, isn't it? So
Yeah.
I suppose really, ultimately, don't get involved in drugs in the first place is
Yeah.
part of the solution.
But that can be inevitable, you know, and if you are going to get involved in drugs, try and practice harm reduction. I was sick and I was desperate, and it's almost like another person takes control of you, because it's this growing, gnawing monster that needs feeding. And
yeah.
I think until society changes, I don't think the life for drug addicts will. Any addicts.
I suppose the beauty of you telling us your story is that, you know, I know that you say you're always in recovery and that's part of it, but, you know, you were using drugs
Yeah.
and you aren't now.
No.
And your life is a completely different life.
Yes.
So there is that hope for people that even if you're deep in it,
Yep.
you can make that choice
Yeah.
on a random spur of the moment.
You can make that choice on a random murky Tuesday.
And things can be different.
Yeah. And it's realising that you're worth it. You know, self-worth, conditions of worth, especially if you've not been told these. One thing, I never met a single rich drug addict in prison.
Like,
Yeah.
and is the charity that you work with, the
Yep.
Cathedral Archer
Project.
project,
Yep.
is that somewhere that people can go if they're...
Yes, 100%. So I walked through the doors the day I got released from prison, and it was just carnage. It was like still being on the wing. We have dentists and nurses that come there. We have an optician who comes there. We have well-being activities. We actually, myself and my colleagues, we brought some mentees to the Deep in Hull last week, just trying to enrich people's lives a little. We also have a social enterprise called Printed by Us. And it's kind of like a what comes next for some of our former homeless service users. And it's what I do I just cannot let it go. And every Wednesday morning I print myself. We have a shop in Orchard Square. Ethical garments, artworks, every single thing is ethical, from the supply chain to even the people printing, because the people printing were all former homeless rough sleepers who've been through challenging circumstances. Every member of our team, even some of our managers. So we have emergency provision for getting people clothed, fed, showered and laundered in our project. And then we have somewhat of a what comes next with people who are ready to step forward. I don't think I will ever want to leave my job. It's the most psychologically informed workplace I have ever worked in. Everything is trauma, and we are known for taking on the most difficult people, because we do not turn anyone away, because one day, years ago, I was that difficult person. And I think that's a good outlook and a good attitude that we have.
Fantastic. So if anybody's listening and they need help, get in touch.
Yeah, if you're
And
Sheffield
how
based.
can they, if you're Sheffield based, how
great.
can people find the project?
The project, well, it's based at the Cathedral on Campo Lane. You can just walk in the doors and ask for support. It's also available online, just CAP, Cathedral Archer Project. And printed by us. We also well represented on our social medias, and I think my bosses would not be too happy if I came on your show and didn't at least give a shameless plug.
Well, it's not shameless at all. We celebrate everything.
Yeah.
Oh, Chris, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
It's been enlightening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It starts with an itch and a tingle, and then it builds and expands. And suddenly, all at once, my legs won't let me stand. I scratch till my fingers go numb.